The series starts with a teenager named Shinozaki having a daydream about his class rep telling him she'll raise her panties for him. Shinozaki's class rep is a girl named Kosaka, who happens to be a straight-A student that's also exceptionally good at sports. Shinozaki recalls how he had liked her for quite an extensive time frame, but he had never had the guts to confess his feelings. Shinozaki finally mans up and decides to confess his feelings to her, and he's surprised when Kosaka agrees to go out with him. Shinozaki is thrilled that Kosaka had agreed to go out with him, but he is stunned when she suddenly reveals that she plans on learning the 48 basic positions to ensure that they'll have a good time. Shinozaki is stunned beyond words as he realizes that Kosaka was talking about sexual positions, and his girlfriend, who had looked so innocent from afar, was not as innocent as she looked. After classes, Shinozaki drops his books in his locker and prepares to go back home, but a third-year student named Ariyama, who happens to be his childhood friend and senior, throws herself against him and hugs him. She tells him that she'll give him the honor of walking home with her since he doesn't have a girlfriend, and Shinozaki initially considers telling her that he's dating someone, but he decides against it, knowing fully well that she'll make a fuss. Shinozaki's younger sister, Kana, arrives and also throws herself at him before announcing that she'll also be giving Shinozaki the honor of walking home with her since he doesn't have a girlfriend. Ariyama loudly proclaims that she's Shinozaki's big sister, and she offers to cook him a mouth-watering dish for dinner, and Kana tags along excitedly. The following day, Kosaka walks over to Shinozaki's seat and tells him that she would like to get to know him better. Shinozaki is excited by this as he believes that she feels the exact same way he does until Kosaka asks what his fetish is. Later on, their homeroom teacher asks Kosaka to carry some books to the library, and Shinozaki offers to help her, but Kosaka misinterprets his actions and suggests that he's into pain-inflictive sexual intercourse. Shinozaki feels embarrassed as Kosaka proclaims this in front of the entire class, but he tries his hardest best to convince her against this. Later on, Kosaka is discussing with the other girls in class, but the other girls imply that she's always talking about inappropriate things such as sex and complain about how hard it is to hang out with her or have a normal conversation with her. Kosaka leaves the class with a sad expression on her face, but she runs into Shinozaki, who had been eavesdropping on her conversation with the other girls. He realizes that she's downcast and asks if she would like to hang out with him, and Kosaka is so touched that she grabs his hand passionately before telling him that she would love to hang out with him. Kosaka and Shinozaki walk down the school halls together, but Shinozaki suddenly stops in his tracks and reaches for Kosaka's hair before removing something from her ear. Kosaka is so stunned by the sudden contact that she draws away from Shinozaki. However, he simply laughs at the fact that Kosaka has a weak point. Kosaka realizes that Shinozaki was pleased with his discovery, so she offers to tell him her weakest point, but Shinozaki corners her to prevent her from saying something absurd. Shinozaki realizes that their faces are pretty close and he gets distracted by Kosaka's lips, but Kosaka breaks the moment by telling him that her excitement came earlier due to their physical contact and she'd like to request a do-over. But Shinozaki is so embarrassed by this that he palms his face in frustration as he realizes that Shinozaki was asking him to act out their earlier moment again. Later on, Kosaka notices that Shinozaki is visibly stressed out and asks him if she has anything to do with this. However, he explains that he's worried about the upcoming exams. Ariyama, Shinozaki's childhood friend, sees Shinozaki beside Kosaka and walks over to Shinozaki before asking him about his new lady friend. Shinozaki introduces Kosaka to Ariyama as his girlfriend, and Ariyama is stunned by this. Ariyama constantly teases him and tells Kosaka that Shinozaki likes to romp up and down, but Shinozaki panics and hurriedly explains that they were kids and were only having pillow fights. He secretly hopes that Kosaka doesn't get the wrong ideas, but Ariyama keeps making wrong insinuations about their relationship while disturbing them throughout the day. During recess, Kosaka sees Ariyama and Shinozaki in a compromising situation, and Shinozaki tries to get himself out of Ariyama's grasp to explain to Kosaka, but Ariyama tightens her grip on him. Later on, Ariyama tricks them into following her to a photo booth and convinces Shinozaki and Kosaka to take a picture together. Kosaka realizes that Ariyama had only forced Kosaka to tag along to provide him with ample opportunity to get a picture with her, but Kosaka displays jealousy about their relationship. Before Ariyama leaves, she advises Kosaka to get into a more intense relationship with Shinozaki, but Shinozaki not to get any wrong ideas from Ariyama. Later on, Shinozaki receives a text from Kosaka asking him to meet her in the gym store. An image of Kosaka lying on a mattress while asking him to join her pops into his head, and he instantly hopes that Kosaka wouldn't try anything crazy. However, he is surprised when he arrives at the store to see Kosaka standing by a table full of instruments. Kosaka asks him to electrocute her or do any of his favorite fetishes to her, but Shinozaki realizes that she's only trying to get into a more intense relationship with him and refuses to electrocute her or perform any weird experiments on her. Afterward, Shinozaki and Kosaka head back together, but Kosaka sports a sad demeanor. Shinozaki notices her sad expression and tries patting her and assuming her fears, but Kosaka turns to him at the same time, and they end up in a compromising position. Kosaka tells Shinozaki that she's only trying to make their relationship more intense so it can last longer, but he tells her that he understands that she's always trying her best and he truly appreciates her efforts. However, the only thing he wants is to be with her. Kosaka is touched by his words and she finally climbs off him. They walk back home together, but right before they part, Kosaka calls Shinozaki by his first name. Shinozaki is so stunned by this that he pulls back, but Kosaka notices this and assumes that Shinozaki hates this. However, he assures her that this is not the case. However, he was deeply touched by how she called him his first name. Later on, Kosaka and Shinozaki are seen walking back home together, but as soon as they get out of the school hallway, they're stuck in the rain. Shinozaki suggests that they share his umbrella, but Kosaka is scared by the prospect of sharing an umbrella with a boy, so she suggests that they run in the rain. However, Shinozaki points out that her clothes will only get wet, but they end up running back home in the rain. The next day, Shinozaki worries about whether their little run in the rain had affected Kosaka in any way and tries texting her to ask about her health, but Kana, his younger sister, walks into his room and nags him. She peeks through his chats while he texts Kosaka, and she is hurt to discover that Shinozaki has a girlfriend and she is no longer the first female in his life. The next day, Kana visits Shinozaki's class to check out the competition, and she is surprised to find out that Kosaka is pretty. Shinozaki introduces Kana to Kosaka, but Kana tries her strongest best to separate them and implies that her brother and her have a special relationship that often involves him caressing her. Shinozaki notices Kosaka freaking out and hurriedly explains that Kana had only forced him to pat her head. During recess, Kosaka voices out her opinion that Shinozaki has a sexual relationship with his sister, but Shinozaki tells her that it's way too extreme and he could never do such a thing. However, Kana arrives at that moment and drags off Shinozaki, while claiming that Shinozaki could only ever enjoy lunch with her. Shinozaki grabs Kosaka's hand as his sister drags him off, but Kana walks off hurriedly in an attempt to get rid of Kosaka. However, Kosaka trips in the process. Kana realizes that she had been inconsiderably rude to Kosaka and apologizes to her before telling her that she would like to be better acquainted with her. Kosaka tells Kana that she has forgiven her and she would like for the same to happen and the duo to settle their differences. Afterwards, Kana offers to give them some privacy and Shinozaki smiles as Kana leaves while thinking about how his sister had grown a little sense of maturity over the years. Later on, Kosaka announces the start of school cleanup week and she manages to get the boys to show up. The following day, Shinozaki is seen assisting Kosaka with cleaning up when Kana and Ariyama walk up to him and start teasing him by riding their brooms and making sexual insinuations with them. Meanwhile, Kosaka notices some boys talking about how they keep running through girlfriends because they keep getting tired of the same old thing, and Kosaka is worried that Shinozaki would do the same. Later on, Kosaka asks Shinozaki if he likes throwing out his old things, but Shinozaki tells her that once he considers something dear to him, he prefers to cherish it forever. Kosaka is visibly touched by this, so she grabs onto him and tells him to keep doing that. Later on, Kosaka watches a commercial that emphasizes the use of homemade lunchboxes to capture the hearts of boyfriends, and Kosaka decides to capture Shinozaki's heart forever by cooking him a homemade meal. However, she fails horribly, and she ends up sharing a lunchbox full of fruits with him. Ariyama notices Kosaka and Shinozaki having lunch together and walks over to them before offering to share her lunch with them. Kosaka realizes that Ariyama is a pro at cooking and begs her to teach her how to cook, and Ariyama agrees to teach her. The next day, Shinozaki and Kosaka hang out at Ariyama's house, and Ariyama teaches Kosaka how to cook. While dicing the vegetables, Kosaka wonders if she'll be good at it because it's her first time, and Ariyama looks at Shinozaki smugly before telling her that Shinozaki was pretty inexperienced himself. Ariyama keeps making sexual insinuations while throwing the occasional subtle shades on him as they prepare their dinner. Shinozaki eventually decides that the shade is getting too much for him, so he excuses himself to go to the bathroom. On his way back from the bathroom, Shinozaki pauses right outside the door and hears strange moans coming from the kitchen. He assumes that something is going on behind the kitchen doors and covers his eyes before walking into the kitchen, only to discover that they had only been moaning about the food. The trio enjoy dinner together, but right after dinner, Ariyama teases Shinozaki by telling him she wants to eat his banana. Shinozaki tells her that she can eat as much as she wants, and Ariyama's eyes grow round as saucers. She covers her eyes as Shinozaki stretches his hand out to her, but she's visibly surprised when she opens it to find a banana. Later that evening, Shinozaki and Kosaka announce that they'll be leaving for home, but they're caught outside in the rain. Shinozaki initially suggests that they share an umbrella, but he notices Kosaka's fright and suggests that they wait for the rain to stop. However, Kosaka overcomes her fear and suggests that they share his umbrella. Shinozaki is surprised at Kosaka's willingness to overcome her fears, but he says nothing about this as they walk back together. Later on, Kosaka tells her father that her boyfriend is coming over, and her father is stunned by the fact that she has a boyfriend. After hearing of this, Kosaka's mother sends her off to buy takeouts. After she leaves, Kosaka's mother tells her husband that she plans on entertaining Shinozaki, and her husband asks how she plans on entertaining him, but Kosaka's mother says nothing. Shinozaki arrives a few minutes later, and Kosaka's mother opens the front door for him. Shinozaki incorrectly assumes that it's Kosaka because she bears a strong resemblance to her mother, but Kosaka's mother welcomes him and offers him some tea. While giving him tea, Kosaka's mother questions Shinozaki about his sexual preferences and his age, and she asks him how he would like to be entertained, but Shinozaki tells her that entertainment will not be necessary and tries changing the conversation to something less sexual. Shinozaki notices a picture album by the table and asks Kosaka's mother if he can see it, and he glances through Kosaka's childhood pictures. Kosaka's mother recalls how Kosaka had always been very flexible from a young age and how she had mastered the hardest positions from Excite books at a young age. Meanwhile, Kosaka's father sneaks peeks at them as he recalls that Kosaka's ability to speak so openly about sex is because her mother had kept whispering lewd things in her ears from a young age. After they're done checking out the photo album, Kosaka's mother asks Shinozaki to help her out with chores. After they're done, Kosaka arrives and her mother asks him to join them for lunch. Shinozaki tells her that he originally planned to eat with Kosaka, but he wouldn't mind eating with Kosaka's mother as well. Kosaka and her mother incorrectly assume that Shinozaki likes married women, but Shinozaki tries correcting them. Shinozaki decides to speak with Kosaka's father, who seems less likely to spout absurd things, but Kosaka and her mother assume that Shinozaki is also interested in men. Kosaka decides to wrest Shinozaki from the arms of her allegedly perverted father by taking him for a walk. After Kosaka returns, she tells her mother that Shinozaki had asked her out for their first date, and her mother advises her to go all the way with him, but her father tells her that she's way too young for that. Kosaka's mother tells her to carry out some research on what other young people were doing on their first dates these days, and Kosaka spends the rest of the day doing some research. The following day, Shinozaki arrives at Kosaka's home, and Kosaka opens the front door for him. Kosaka tilts her head to the side, and Shinozaki is stunned by how cute she is. Kosaka notices that Shinozaki is at a loss for words and asks if he had noticed something, but Shinozaki tells her that he thought her clothes were nice. Kosaka tells Shinozaki that she had done some research, and she wanted to gauge the effectiveness of the 30-degree tilt before committing to it. Shinozaki sighs in frustration as Kosaka's words ruin the novelty of the moment. Kosaka and Shinozaki visit the movie cinema to watch a love movie, and Shinozaki thinks about how choosing a romance movie was the best idea since it would only depict love and there wouldn't be any explicit action under the screen, but he almost loses his marbles when the main characters start doing it at that time. Shinozaki is surprised that even romance movies have Excite scenes these days, but Kosaka looks at him smugly. Shinozaki and Kosaka spend the rest of the day doing fun things, and their date finally comes to an end. Before they part ways, Shinozaki apologizes that they had not done anything intense because she was so engrossed in the moment. Shinozaki tells her that he's content just to spend time with her, but Kosaka takes it wrongly and walks off with a sad expression on her face. Shinozaki decides to cheer her up by asking her out on another date to the park that weekend where they could watch the cherry blossoms in the park, and Kosaka brightens up at this as she tells Shinozaki that she would do her best to be a better girlfriend. The following day, Kosaka falls sick at school and Shinozaki takes her to the school clinic. Shinozaki takes her to the nurse in the school clinic, but the school nurse turns out to be a perverted woman who tells them that she'll leave them to get down to business. Shinozaki tries to correct her, but the nurse tells him that she's not leaving yet, she's coming, and winks at him for a special effect. She notices Shinozaki's pained expression and sneaks out of the room, but Shinozaki secretly wonders why everyone in his school has such a lewd mindset. After the nurse leaves, Shinozaki calls Kosaka's mother and tells her of her daughter's condition. He gives Kosaka a bottle of milk while hoping that she'll get better, but she spills the milk all over herself while drinking it. Kosaka assumes that Shinozaki enjoys water sports and implies that he is aroused, and he is stunned beyond words at her accusations. Her mother walks in at that moment and assumes the same thing, but Shinozaki laments about the Kosaka family genes and tries correcting them. Kosaka's mother decides on taking her home, but while they walk back home together, she expresses her hopes that she'll get better in time for her date with Shinozaki. The following Sunday, Kosaka calls Shinozaki and tells him that she is fully recovered, and they walk to the park for a picnic. Unfortunately, they're both pained to discover that all the blossoms have fallen due to the heavy rain that fell the previous night. Kosaka freaks out and worries that she has failed Shinozaki as a girlfriend, but Shinozaki tries to calm her fears by telling her that he's content just to spend some time with her. Kosaka finally cheers up when Shinozaki tells her that they could always watch the blossoms the following year, and she stares at him with passion before asking him to promise her that they'll still be together the following year. Later on, a new girl named Rina arrives at Shinozaki's school, and Shinozaki is thrilled that a normal kid is finally attending his school. The teacher asks Rina to introduce herself, but the students are weirded out by her after Rina reveals that she enjoys romping about with hairy males. Shirazaki and Kosaka decide not to judge her for this, and they try befriending her after their teacher leaves. Rina receives them in good-natured spirits and asks why people thought it was weird to romp around with dogs, but Shinozaki tells her that it probably has a lot more to do with the way that she said it. Rina reveals that her weirdness was mostly because she had gone to a girls' school for quite a long while and she has never made a male friend. Shinozaki tells her that he doesn't mind being friends with her, and Rina is excited to make friends with Shinozaki. Rina surmises that Shinozaki and Kosaka are a couple before revealing that females touch each other as a symbol of friendship in her former school and asks if Shinozaki would like to do the same. Shinozaki pales at the thought of this, and he is shocked beyond words as he realizes that Rina is the furthest thing from normal, but he politely refuses. Later on, Kosaka tells Rina that she's a novice at befriending males herself, so she takes Rina to the school nurse and asks her to educate Rina about friendship with males. Shinozaki tries making subtle signs that the perverted school nurse is the worst person to educate Rina, but Kosaka ignores him. During lunch, Rina and Kosaka keep engaging in lewd conversations, and Shinozaki secretly wishes that the ground would swallow him whole after Kosaka admits to the entire school that she wears a C-cup. Later on, Ariyama notices Shinozaki hanging out with Rina and joins in on their discussion. Ariyama introduces herself as Shinozaki's mistress, and Rina tells him that she wants to be his mistress as well. Shinozaki protests against this, but Kosaka chirps in and embarrasses Shinozaki after telling the others that it wouldn't work out because Shinozaki can only be aroused when wearing nothing but a nursery school cap. After classes, Rina thanks them for showing her around the school and asks if she can think of them as friends. Shinozaki and Kosaka tell her that they wouldn't mind being friends with her, and Kosaka draws them in for a goodbye kiss. Kosaka expresses her surprise that friends kiss, but Shinozaki tells her that friends don't do that under normal circumstances. The next day, Rina tells Kosaka that one of her friends just broke up with her, but Kosaka promises to be her best friend for life. Shinozaki decides to cheer Rina up by suggesting that they all hang out, so they head out to the zoo the following weekend. While they watch the animals, a dog suddenly pees in public, and Rina makes a weird remark about how a dog's woofer is bigger than his. Shinozaki is embarrassed beyond words, so he tries convincing them to watch a turtle instead, but Ariyama remarks on how Shinozaki is comparing his little turtle to a turtle, and Shinozaki almost dies of embarrassment. Meanwhile, Kosaka's parents get bored at home and decide to go out on a date to the zoo. They notice a little girl who gets lost in the crowd, and they cheer her up by showing her around. Kosaka's father finally decides to help her find her mother after his wife starts spewing lewd words in her husband's ears. After they help the little girl with finding her mother, Kosaka's father trips on his way back and complains about how he was always getting hurt due to his old age. However, Kosaka's mother suggests that he can always use his back next time, and he is stunned at how his wife managed to give a sexual meaning to ordinary words. The following week, Rina announces that she has just got a new phone, and Kosaka takes pictures of her with Shinozaki. Rina thanks Shinozaki for giving her first memory with a gentleman before announcing to the entire school that she had just taken some intimate pictures with Shinozaki. But Shinozaki chases after her and demands that Rina should tell everyone that it's facial pics. Later on, Shinozaki takes a walk with Kosaka, and Kosaka tells him that she recently found out that the holding of the chin makes the heart pound. Shinozaki blushes at this as he realizes what comes next after this. Kosaka implies that they try creating that moment, but she stares at him with an expression so intimidating that Shinozaki loses his guts. Afterward, Kosaka also tells Shinozaki how she had discovered that the ultimate girlfriend could easily predict her boyfriend's thoughts without him telling her of his feelings. Kosaka tells Shinozaki that she wants to increase her ultimate girlfriend power and asks him to refrain from talking to her. She ends up predicting his thoughts correctly on so many occasions. However, Shinozaki faces public stigma for this because Kosaka keeps doing the most selfless things for him. Rina and Ariyama learn about this and try increasing their bond with Shinozaki by predicting what Shinozaki feels like eating. Shinozaki realizes that they're probably planning on saying something inappropriate, so he screams out that that's not what he's thinking about. But Ariyama correctly predicts that Shinozaki would like to eat his favorite food and offers to cook it for him. Shinozaki realizes that he was wrong and tries convincing Ariyama to cook it for him. Later on, the student council holds a meeting, and their leader, an outspoken and principled young lady named Igarashi, asks them to make suggestions on what they think the other students need. Shizuno, a creepy girl who enjoys watching couples during their exciting moments, suggests that girls and boys be allowed to share the same locker rooms. Igarashi refuses and asks them to suggest something else, but Kosaka suggests that they allow students to carry exciting books in the class halls. Igarashi initially refuses, but Kosaka blackmails her by reminding her of how she had hurt her while she was tongue training the other day. The council members tease Igarashi, but she tries convincing them that she had only been practicing with her sax. Igarashi eventually gives in to Kosaka's wishes as the emotional damage proves to be too much for her. Later on, Kosaka develops hiccups and Shinozaki tries everything in his power to calm them. He decides to calm her by getting her to sneeze, and they enter the practical lab in search of paper strings. Ariyama sees them entering the practical lab and hides, intending to scare them, but she's surprised when she starts hearing strange moans. Ariyama springs out after hearing Shinozaki telling Kosaka that he'll insert it slowly, but she's surprised when she sees Shinozaki inserting paper strings into Kosaka's mouth. She surmises that Shinozaki has a weird paper fetish. Kosaka's hiccups finally calm down, and Shinozaki explains that he had only been trying to help his girlfriend with calming her hiccups. Later on, Rina visits a convenience store to get some chocolates, but she's surprised when she sees a chocolatey Common Delight placed on the same shelf. She considers asking the store attendant about it, but she decides that she would be considered weird, so she says nothing. Rina realizes that it's more expensive than the other chocolates, so she decides that it must be some sort of heavenly delight that she has to get her hands on. She heads over to the cashier and pays for the chocolatey delight without knowing that it's a condom. The store attendant is stunned by Rina's boldness as she purchases the chocolate in bulk and tells him of her plans of sharing it with the rest of the class while enjoying it to her fill. Later on, Shinozaki picks up Ariyama from her house. On their way back to school, they notice a guy named Saya, who is pretty popular among the ladies. Shinozaki stares at him in jealousy while harboring hopes that Kosaka would not go crazy over him like the other girls. Later on, Shinozaki visits the restroom and walks out to see Kosaka and Saya having a conversation. Shinozaki sees Ariyama around the corner and asks how far Ariyama is willing to go with him. Ariyama cowers in fear while Shinozaki stares at her with a hideous expression. He notices Saya hugging Kosaka and hugs Ariyama tightly while trying to convince himself that hugs happen all the time between friends. Rina walks over to them to ask what happened, and Shinozaki explains everything to her. Saya rips open his shirt at that moment, and Shinozaki declares that he'll confront him. He walks over to Saya and Kosaka with an intimidating look, and Rina comments about how she has never seen Shinozaki with a more hideous expression. Shinozaki panics at the last minute and asks Saya if he's friends with Kosaka. Rina and Ariyama are stunned by how Shinozaki loses his marbles, but Saya doesn't take this harshly, and he tells Shinozaki of how his popularity among the females had made him lack male friends. He tells him that he wants to have more male friends, and he was hoping that Shinozaki could be friends with him, which is why he had decided to meet up with Kosaka since she's his girlfriend, and she knew a lot about him. During the Bamboo Festival, people hang their wishes on the ropes, and Shinozaki peeks at their wishes. He makes fun of Ariyama for her wish to start wearing a B cup at the very least, but Ariyama is embarrassed about this and asks Shinozaki to stop staring at other people's wishes. Later on, Kosaka asks if Shinozaki wants to know what she wished for, but Shinozaki thinks it's something creepy and tells her no despite being curious about it. Kosaka is hurt by this, as it turns out that she had wished to hang wishes with him during the next Bamboo Festival. Shinozaki calls after her and tries to apologize to her, but Kosaka walks off and hurt. Later on, Shinozaki and Kosaka do warm-ups in preparation for their upcoming sports, and Shinozaki stares at Kosaka's chest as she bounces up and down. She notices him doing this and walks over to him, staring at her, and walks over to him before asking if she could do a favor for him as his girlfriend. Kosaka raises her shirt, and Shinozaki incorrectly assumes that she's trying to undress before him, but it turns out that Kosaka was only placing a placard with his name on it on her chest. Shinozaki sighs in relief, but the gym instructor breaks their moment by asking Shinozaki to carry some supplies to the gym store. Saya offers to follow Shinozaki, but Kosaka sneaks after them in worry as she notices Sia's apparent interest in Shinozaki. After Shinozaki and Sia drop the supplies, Shinozaki asks Saya to teach him how to play baseball in secret so that he can impress Kosaka the following day, but Saya stylishly teaches him how to handle a bat during male-to-male intercourse. Kosaka walks in on them and incorrectly assumes that they're up to something, but Shinozaki keeps it a secret from her because he doesn't want Kosaka to know that he's bad at baseball. Later on, Shinozaki joins the rest of their classmates. Kosaka is worried about him, thinking he's busy learning the 48 positions with Saya, and she runs off to the field to search for him, only to see him with Kana, Rina, and Ariyama. She sighs while expressing how relieved she was to see that he's in safe hands, but Shinozaki tries convincing her that the reverse is the case. The start of the baseball game is announced, and Shinozaki rushes off the baseball court. Unfortunately, he plays horribly, and the only strike he manages to make ends up hitting Sia right where the sun doesn't shine. Shinozaki panics and kneels right in front of Saya, and Kosaka almost passes out at this. At the end of the game, Shinozaki apologizes to Kosaka for being such a bad player. He also reveals that he had taken secret lessons to improve his playing skills, but they hadn't helped. Kosaka is touched that he put in to impress her, but she gives subtle hints that she had thought something else was going on. Later on, Kosaka and Shinozaki take a walk down the park together, and they discover a lost dog together. They feed it some food, and it shows them some neat tricks. Kosaka asks the dog to beg, but he suddenly races under her skirt and licks her. Shinozaki is surprised by this and tries correcting the dog by asking it to beg properly, but he stares at Shinozaki's ground in disgust. Shinozaki wonders what kind of weird owner the dog has, but Rina shows up and announces that it's one of her dogs. Later on, the student council announces that Shinozaki's class will be going on a 2-day, 1-night camping trip, and Igarashi suggests that they all take a test of courage. Igarashi offers to help the other council members to plan out activities for their classes, but the other members refuse. Unfortunately, they're unable to come up with anything worthwhile, so they end up going back to Igarashi to bribe her and ask for help. The first day of the camping trip finally arrives and the class takes off. After they arrive, the boys and girls are asked to cook. Shinozaki hurts his hand while cutting some vegetables and Seiya offers to suck the blood, but Kosaka notices this and scurries over in record time to suck the blood. Seiya is pained that Kosaka ruined his moment, but he continues cooking. However, the animals in the forest are so drawn to his irresistible charms that they come around to get a taste of his cooking. Seiya announces that he has brought a special mushroom for them, and Shinozaki is excited by this as it's one of his favorite delicacies, but Kosaka forbids him from heading over to meet him. Later on, Igarashi announces that it's time for the nighttime test of courage and Seiya volunteers to be the leader of the scaring committee. The scaring committee walks off to hide in the forest and Kosaka grabs onto Shinozaki's hand while knowing fully well that Seiya had an ulterior motive. Shinozaki incorrectly assumes that Seiya is scared of the forest and smiles at this as he realizes that it's allowing him to be closer to her. While they walk down the forest, Shizuno creeps up on them and makes her appearance known right when they're having a moment. Shizuno asks them if they can carry on with what they were about to do, but Shinozaki asks if she had followed them to scare them. Meanwhile, Rina is chased by the first scary group and she takes to her heels and runs around the forest. Rina runs into Kosaka and Shinozaki and calms down a bit before joining them in their walk down the forest. They walk down for a bit, but a half-naked figure suddenly starts swinging through the forest. Rina shrieks in fright and Shinozaki tries to protect Kosaka, but Kosaka takes a fighting stance as she realizes that it's probably Seiya trying to get closer to Shinozaki. Kosaka and Rina get entangled as they try to avoid Seiya, who keeps sweeping through the forest, but Seiya's ropes get loose and his butt rams right into Kosaka's face. His unmentionables are next as they ram into Rina and the four fall into an entangled mess. Igarashi springs out at that moment, hoping to arrest some annoying students doing something naughty, but she is unprepared for what she sees. Igarashi cries out in horror while Shizuno comforts her, and after she calms down, she asks Shizuno if she can sleep beside her that night. Shizuno's mind dives deep into the gutters as she assumes that Igarashi was asking her to sleep with her, but she tells her that she prefers watching other people doing things. However, Igarashi stares at her in confusion. Azuna realizes that Igarashi is about to have another panic attack, so she agrees to allow her to sleep beside her that night. Later that night, the girls take a shower before bed, and Shizuno asks Kosaka if she's ever been with a guy. Kosaka reveals that she's inexperienced, and Shizuno asks Igarashi just how far she thinks a couple should go during high school trips. Igarashi blushes furiously before telling her that they could join hands. However, Shizuno smiles creepily and tells Kosaka that a couple of other things could certainly be joined since they were both teenagers with raging hormones. Before Kosaka goes to bed, she recalls everything that Shizuno had told her and wonders if Shinozaki and her would take things further that night, especially since it was the only night of their camping and the one night that they could be alone without the supervision of adults. Surprisingly, Shinozaki's head pops in through her camping tent at that moment and Kosaka jolts back in surprise. Kosaka tells Shinozaki that she has finally realized just how serious he is about their relationship, but Shinozaki thinks lightly of this and asks Kosaka to take a walk into the woods with him. Meanwhile, Kosaka's mind is haunted by the fear of the inevitable as she is still mentally unprepared to go all the way with Shinozaki. Shinozaki suddenly draws to a halt and turns to face Kosaka before revealing that there's something he's been wanting to do with her during this trip. Kosaka turns away and braces herself for the unknown, but she's surprised when Shinozaki reaches for her hand and tells her that he would like to create a special moment with her while watching the stars from a breathtaking scenery. Kosaka's eyes tear up with emotions as she apologizes for being such an inexperienced girlfriend, but Kosaka calms her and assures her that they'll slowly cross all hurdles together over time. After they arrive at school, Igarashi pledges to uncover all forms of indecency among students. She notices a couple stepping out of a vacant classroom and decides to inspect the classroom for traces of impure behavior, but she runs into Shizuno, who reveals that the couple had been carrying out some sexual activities. They suddenly hear some footsteps approaching and Shizuno drags Igarashi into a closet with the hidden intentions of spying on the new couple. However, she lies to Igarashi that they're lying in wait so they can apprehend the unsuspecting couple. Shinozaki and Kanna, his younger sister, walk into the classroom at that moment, and Shinozaki educates Kanna on how she shouldn't let milk spill so carelessly. Shinozaki accidentally spills some milk in a haphazard fashion, and Shizuno and Igarashi assume that Shinozaki is asking his sister to go down on him. Igarashi is appalled by this, and she tries bursting out of the closet to stop him, but Shizuno holds her back while trying to see more explicit content through the peephole. Their struggle leads to them falling out of the closet in a compromising position, and Igarashi accuses Shinozaki of committing an unforgivable act. She asks him to follow her to the student council room and asks that he tenders a letter of apology before the entire school. Shinozaki tries correcting Igarashi, but she doesn't listen to him. Igarashi walks off in the far distance, but Shinozaki notices that her skirt is raised and tries to tell her inconspicuously. Shinozaki asks Igarashi if she sometimes feels like touching a butt, but Igarashi's resolve to punish him is strengthened as she leads him toward the student council room. They run into Kosaka, who realizes that Igarashi's skirt is raised, but she says nothing about this and simply tells Igarashi that it's hot. Igarashi explains everything that she thought had occurred to Kosaka, but Kosaka's mind is glued to Igarashi's panties and she fails to comprehend what Igarashi tells her. Igarashi turns toward Kosaka and suddenly realizes that the student body has been staring at her panties. She wonders why no one had told her, and she suddenly realizes that Shinozaki had been trying to tell her casually. Igarashi apologizes to Shinozaki, and Shinozaki tells her that he'll forgive her if she promises to let him go without asking him to tender a public apology, and Igarashi lets him go on a light permit. Later on, Shinozaki asks Kosaka out on another date, but she tells him that she can't make it because her father hurt his back during an intense, exciting session with her mother. Shinozaki worries about what to do over the weekend, but Ariyama appears as if by magic and badgers him into going shopping with her. Shinozaki and Ariyama visit the cinema together, but while vetting tickets, the attendant implies that they're a couple. Ariyama and Shinozaki are both embarrassed by this, and Shinozaki blames Ariyama for this since she was always clinging to him. After they leave the cinema, Ariyama asks Shinozaki if he would like to come over, and she stares at him suggestively while telling him that her parents weren't around. She asks him to come over and tells him she'll cook for him. She also implies that other things might happen, but Shinozaki tells her that he's aware that the reason why she's inviting him is because she is scared of being alone. After they arrive at Ariyama's house, Ariyama tells Shinozaki that she wants to change into casual clothing, so she leaves for her room. Ariyama mistakenly handcuffs herself and loses the key. She falls on the floor while trying to move around, and she calls out for Shinozaki and asks him to help her. Shinozaki is forced to escort Ariyama to the restroom after she gets the urge to pee. He also ends up cooking for her and brushing her teeth after dinner. Ariyama instructs Shinozaki to stay by her side, and they end up reminiscing about their childhood memories. Ariyama tells Shinozaki that she feels sleepy, but she'd like a shower before sleeping. Shinozaki surmises that Ariyama is asking him to bath with her, but Ariyama makes fun with him after learning of this and tells him she doesn't plan on going that far with him. After Ariyama showers, Shinozaki assists her up to the bed, and he notices a bulge in her butt pocket. He realizes that it's the key, and he tries removing it while Ariyama moans so loudly that the entire neighborhood hears them. After Shinozaki removes the key, he unlocks the handcuffs, but Ariyama convinces him to sleep over because it's already late. The following day, Shinozaki's class has a cooking practical, and Kosaka promises to cook the most mouth-watering lunch for Shinozaki. During the cooking class, Kosaka dices the vegetables with religious vigor, and Shinozaki stares at her in awe. Saya appears as if by magic, and Shinozaki tells him that he's touched by how much effort Kosaka is putting to make him happy. Shinozaki is so overtaken by emotions that he fails to realize that he has been handling his knife improperly. Saya notices this and tries showing him how to handle a knife, but he manages to make it look erotic. Kosaka turns to look at Shinozaki, but she realizes that Sia is guiding him in an improper way, and she keeps staring at them without realizing that the food on the fire is already burning. Shinozaki tries to run to her to save her from a fire accident, but Sia holds him into place and keeps ramming his butt into him. After Kosaka realizes what had happened, she gathers the charred food and tastes it. She loudly proclaims that it's delicious because it was made out of passion. However, her classmates refuse to taste it. Rina decides to taste it due to their strong bond as friends, but she almost dies of food poisoning and tries to hide it. Kosaka discovers this and mopes around while expressing sadness that she couldn't prepare a mouth-watering dish for Shinozaki. However, Shinozaki tells her that he would gladly eat the charred remnants of the food. Kosaka tries discouraging him against this as she fears that he might also become a victim of food poisoning, but Shinozaki tells her that he hopes he falls sick because he would love to be nursed by her. Kosaka stares at Shinozaki passionately as she is touched by Shinozaki's proclamations. Later on, Shinozaki and Kosaka go out for a date, and the day goes by without a hassle, but Shinozaki senses Kosaka's discomfort and contemplates whether to ask her about this. Kosaka notices him staring at her and braces herself for physical contact before closing her eyes in expectation of a kiss. Shinozaki is stunned by her actions, and he tells her that he had been staring at her for another reason. The following day, a female student from Shinozaki's class bends in front of him, and he ends up staring up at her skirt. He notices Kosaka staring at him and hopes to himself that she doesn't believe that he's affected by it, but Kosaka walks up to him and tells him it's best to sit down if he can't handle his excitement. Shinozaki gets frustrated by this, and he tells her that it's not because he has a hard-on that he can't stand up. Shinozaki realizes that Kosaka was an entirely different person from the lady he had originally thought she was, and he wonders if he truly loves her. During recess, Kan approaches Shinozaki and asks him to teach her about insemination, a topic from her biology textbook during the weekend. Sakiko approaches them and thinks of how she didn't have an elder sibling who could teach her schoolwork. Shinozaki notices Sakiko's wistfulness and asks Sakiko if she would also like to learn about insemination, but she blushes in embarrassment before walking off. During the weekend, Sakiko resumes work at a cafe, but the customers keep making the weirdest orders. Kosaka arrives and orders a banana dipped in milk and mango, but Sakiko assumes that it's probably her overactive imagination. Kosaka stays back to take pictures of herself enjoying her fruit parfait, but the banana slips out of the cup and ends up sandwiched between Kosaka's chest. Sakiko offers to get her a napkin, but Kosaka politely refuses before taking pictures of the banana stuck between her chest. After she leaves, Sakako coys to recover from the shock, but Shinozaki walks in. Shinozaki tells her that his sister asked him to get a drink for the both of them, but he had forgotten the name. He describes it as something round in shape that spurts out milk, and Sakiko almost passes out while thinking that Shinozaki is asking for her milk. She later gets his order right, but on her way back home, she is still peeved about the day's weird events. An absurd thought suddenly drops into her mind as she wonders if she'll have to sell her milk to customers when she finally starts lactating. Sakiko pales at the thought of this and wonders why she keeps having absurd thoughts before running home in fear. Meanwhile, Shizuno watches in the background. During art class the following day, Shinozaki and his classmates are asked to sketch the forest's scenery or the people within it. Shinozaki tries sketching Rina, but the wind keeps blowing her skirt up. He decides to ask Ariyama if he can sketch her, but Ariyama is appalled by this and horrifically asks if he's so lewd that he would ask for that much from a friend. Later on, Shinozaki walks around the forest grounds with Kosaka and tells her how he couldn't draw the scenery because it was way too plain and he couldn't find a model who could stay in the same position for a long while. However, Kosaka offers to be his model. Kosaka poses for him and Shinozaki begins to draw her. The sun highlights Shinozaki's features and Shinozaki is suddenly struck by how beautiful she is. Shinozaki regains all his fond memories of her and realizes that he loves her for who she is. Shinozaki tells Kosaka that he loves her, but she is stunned by this revelation and she doesn't respond. Shinozaki stutters and tries to take back his words, but the shock of the moment finally fades and Kosaka tells him that she loves him too. They draw closer as if connected by passion and stare deeply into each other's eyes. The series ends with promises of more intensity to come between Shinozaki and Kosaka.